Thank you for listening to this episode of Wayfinders. So we're going to meet Matthew Barton, or Matt. Now, I've known Matt for about 5 years, and we were colleagues together in Melbourne for 4 years. The one thing I can say with absolute certainty about Matt is that he is one of the most thoughtful, if not the most thoughtful people I've ever met. He's not been called the master reflector for nothing. And so with that in mind, we're going to hear from Matt about the journey that he and his partner Charlotte have undertaken in moving from Melbourne, Australia to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. When I spoke to Matt earlier in July this year, he had just hit his 1-year anniversary since making the move. Now, when we're following people's journeys, when they're not in the country that we live in, we capture moments of their journey often through social media. So I certainly followed Matt and Charlotte's journey through their Instagram pages. What I didn't appreciate, but what was rammed home to me crystal clear speaking with Matt, is just how much effort and planning and thought Matt and Charlotte were putting into their journey every day as it progressed to create the life that they wanted for themselves in Amsterdam. Check this out, for example.
We used to joke that we were running an organisation and Charlotte was the CEO. So she was the boss and would oversee everything. And then we would have our different departments along the way. So, for example, Charlotte was head of housing. So she was the one leading our rental search. I was head of finances. So I was making sure we were, extracting all the value we could out of the limited funds that we were working with for these things.
And so for me, and this episode, if it's really about anything, it's actually kind of a bit of a reality check, but in a good way, because it outlines, I think with piercing clarity that only someone like Matt can provide, just what it takes to get up and move halfway around the world and start a new life together, either by yourself or, in Matt's case, with his partner, Charlotte. And so, let's go and meet Matt now. Let's go. Welcome, Matt, to the Wayfinders podcast. Great to have you. Well, where am I talking to you? Where are you sitting right now, Matt?
I'm in a 70 square metre apartment in Oud in Amsterdam, Sasha.
In where? What?
Oud, which is, you would say it, or I said it, at Oud, and it's Old South. It's a sort of suburb in Amsterdam. Yeah, just next to.
Is that one of the old quarters of Amsterdam?
Yeah, it's right. It's actually a really nice suburb. We kind of stumbled across the apartment here. It's there's a lot of actually just down towards Wandle Park. There's a lot of mansions and sort of these kind of beautiful old buildings, and then streets of apartment blocks, which all have the same identical facing. There's a lot of families around here, and finance firms are set up not too far away. So it feels like there's some expats in this community as well.
Well, firstly, congratulations on your amazingly successful move around the world. It's been tremendous to watch from a distance on Instagram. Thank God for that. And I remember, so we used to work together. And I remember you telling me a story that you, a couple of years ago maybe, you watched the big Beatles Get Back documentary, which I think was on Amazon. It's how many, 30 hours? How many hours is that one?
It's 18 hours or 20 hours. 18
hours. There you go. 18 hours. And you watched the whole thing, right?
3 times actually.
Wow. And I remember, because it must have had an impact on you, a big impact, because I remember you saying something like, when they disbanded in 1970, they were about 27 years old, and you were at that time 27 years old, and you kind of asked yourself, or you were struck by what they had done at that age, and you asked yourself, what am I doing? And it was a big motivation for you to think quite differently about what you wanted to do in the short term, but also the direction that you wanted your life to. Could you tell us about this kind of, if it's an epiphany or a slow burner? Could you tell us all about
Yeah.
that, Matt? It's a great story.
Yeah. Well, I seem to find a way to weave the Beatles into any part of my life
Okay.
and any key milestone.
There's a
But
Beatles song for that, right?
yeah, and yeah, massive fan of Beatles, by the way. Yeah, I think it was that timing around. We'd just come out of COVID.
Mm,
Obviously, during COVID, our plans, it felt to me, became a little more short-sighted. It was just so hard to grapple with
mm,
the future when it was so unclear what it was going to hold. So we kind of parked all those plans, and yeah, I remember I started watching it at the beach house over Christmas, New Year, that documentary, and it was
mm,
kind of coincided with the timing of my annual review of things and goals for the year ahead. That nice kind of moment that we all
mm,
take in Melbourne, and yeah, just seeing the Beatles, but and just that thing of like for them, like they were going
mm,
after it. They were fully immersed in what they were doing. They had their ups
mm,
and downs in that very compressed period.
mm,
But it just was another thing to add to my thinking around, like, yeah, what
mm,
does the future hold? And I've always had probably within me this thing of um, living a full life or living a big life. I think that was probably the moment where we started to more crystallize the planning around making the move overseas.
What have been some of the, like, in terms of the expectations, or yeah, what you expected might happen? What are some things that have played out as you expected, and what are some things that actually are quite different to what you expected? Because if I understand correctly, Matt, you and Charlotte both landed in Amsterdam, and didn't have work teed up.
Mm,
You Once you got there, you started to look for it and
mm,
network and so on, which is very different to a lot of people I've spoken with previously.
mm,
And they would always say that it's really good to use a corporate framework to get you into a new country, and then to kind of like sever ties after a certain period of time and go it alone. Whereas
mm.
you and Charlotte did something much braver, actually, and much more uncertain. Yeah, like,
Mm.
what was the experience once you were kind of on the ground?
Well, what I'd say about the people you've spoken to, is that's a bloody good idea, and that's really good advice. Because
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I think we were so focused on unwinding our life in Melbourne in those six
Mm,
months between
mm,
making a firm decision and like
mm,
putting it on the table, and when we flew in late June, and
mm.
there was a lot of unwinding to do there.
What did you have to like? Can't you just get on a plane and move? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
what did you what were you unwinding, Matt?
So I think, yeah, that's a really good question. I'm probably being a bit dramatic. It felt like a big task because this
Mm,
was where we'd both lived our whole
yep.
lives, and there was the practical requirement to kind of leave our rental and get rid of all that
Mm,
stuff and pack
mm,
all of our possessions into, it was 6 suitcases that we brought across. So making the
mm.
decision, and we had what was pretty much a garage sale in the week before, getting our friends over to buy
Yep.
all of our camping gear and, auctioning
Yeah,
it off
right.
and things like that.
So did you I mean, it's kind of, it's a really great practical topic, right? Like, what,
Mm,
all the stuff. Again, the older you get, the more stuff you have.
yeah.
Did you store anything in Australia, or did you take and sell or give away everything?
Yeah, we did that.
Yep.
We tried to offload things like beds and
Yep.
more bulky items on
Hmm.
marketplace, or hand down to sisters and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I left a few kind of prized possessions, if you like, in a
Mm.
box at my mum's place, which
Yeah.
is, collecting dust there.
Yeah.
Um,
Kind of like
and
your old sports trophies
yeah,
and school
trophies and things
reports and
like
that kind of stuff, right? Yep.
yeah, that kind of thing. And then really we got rid of all of our stuff aside from
Mm.
that. And yeah, I always thought that we lived quite minimalistically in terms of our possessions, but yeah, you just realize how much stuff you've got when it comes
Mm.
to squeezing it into 3 suitcases and 60 kilograms. Yeah, you have
Mm.
to make some calls.
Now, Matt, can we come back to a topic that we started with, which is the big life, that was kind of something, yeah, really important to you and Charlotte, to have a life that's different to what it would be staying in Australia. And you use the words big life, but what does that what does that actually mean? Like, what does that mean to you? What are some of the manifestations of having this kind of life for you and Charlotte?
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out, to be honest, Sasha.
Yeah,
Having
yeah,
now arrived here and settled in, it's
mm,
kind of like I can finally lift the eyes towards what that's going to mean in the context of Amsterdam.
hmm,
And I think so much of my energy over the last 18 months has been focused on,
mm,
leaving Melbourne, first arriving in Amsterdam, needing to do the trip back home and navigate
mm,
that, come back and then start again in a sense.
mm,
It's kind of like now I finally feel as though life
mm,
can start. Like
yeah,
the labour we've put in up to this point has put us in a
mm,
position now to enjoy it. So
yeah,
small things like being able to travel,
mm,
with Europe at the doorstep.
yeah,
Just been to Portugal and then now off to Berlin next week, and
yeah,
then got a couple of trips planned. So that travel is going to be a part of it.
mm,
I've been really focused on, finding my feet from a career and work perspective as well here,
mm,
and understanding what that means in the context of this new Amsterdam project and
mm,
where it fits in, and how to build a network and
mm,
apply my trade in a new context. So I think
mm,
work for me is a part of it as well.
mm, yeah,
And then it's kind of finding what those other interests are going to be here,
mm.
and I'm still honing that and sort of exploring that in conjunction with all this with Charlotte.
So, as I said, Matt and Charlotte's story is one of commitment, resilience, and discipline, though I never realised exactly what they encountered and overcame in Amsterdam. Looking for work, getting permits, moving house many times, even a family illness, unfortunately. Throughout all of this, Matt retained a sense of perspective and even humour, as we will see.
Have you watched the movie Madagascar?
I haven't seen that one. That's the animated one, isn't
Animated
it?
one.
Yes.
There's the story of the penguins that live in the zoo, that
Mm,
they've got this scheme that they're going to escape from the New
mm,
York Zoo
mm,
and make their way to Antarctica, their hometown, where their spiritual home
mm,
is, where they should live out the rest of their life. And
mm,
it follows these really hilarious penguins on their journey to arrive back in Antarctica, and they get there finally after all the pain they've been there, and they're standing there, the four penguins, and they're all just looking at each other in Antarctica where they've been working to get there, and one of them just turns to the others and goes, "Well, this sucks." And it's kind of like
yeah.
I think we've had some moments on this journey.
All right, so you're in Amsterdam. It was a bloody good idea to come with a company, but you guys were brave and you didn't. You just went. And how was it?
Yeah,
How was
so
how was adjusting?
a part of that kind of discontinuity plan was to spend a good chunk of time traveling,
Yeah.
and we did that, and that was really fun. Traveled around Europe for a few weeks
Mm,
with friends and family and things like that. And we kind of arrived in Amsterdam and spent a couple of weeks getting a feel for the city, more in tourist mode than
mm,
than work mode. And we had made a somewhat conscious decision to not find work, to take the pressure off. And we also
mm,
had this idea in our head that it would be more effective to do a job search in person, to be able to network and to
mm,
take in-person interviews and those kind of things.
mm,
What we didn't account for is that August is summertime for Amsterdam. So pretty much everyone goes to Brazil or somewhere, exotic around Europe,
okay.
to find the sun, and
Yeah.
even September. So you can imagine what it was like trying to do networking and job searching and
Mm,
interviewing during that time of the year. It was really
mm,
dead, and that was a massive shock. So
okay.
all of a sudden it went from pretty quickly, it went from, this is a really exciting career break. How nice is it to be able to just travel and,
Mm,
be overseas and making this new thing happen, to like
mm,
being in like Shara and I having to really keep each
yeah.
other positive and,
Yeah.
yeah, like set a life up here.
Mm,
And it wasn't easy at the start.
yeah.
I would say that the uh, like leaving is difficult, and that's it, but it's, you don't actually have to do anything up
Mm,
until those few things. I think
mm,
that what shocked us was more the on the other side of it, um, and maybe it was naive of us to think it would happen, but I'm kind of I'm kind of happy that we did it in the way we did in the end, now that we're 12 months down the track. But I love to kind of have a clear concept of all the moving parts and what it takes. Right? So it really frustrated me at the start that I just couldn't pin down what was required and the order things had to be done in.
To get a job or to kind of settle?
To settle, yeah. So
like house, electricity, phone, that kind of stuff, yeah?
Yeah, the interconnection between a working permit and being registered to live in the city and having a rental and having a job and having a contract and having a bank and having an insurer. And it felt like everyone wanted you to have another thing to allow them to have the thing that you were asking them for. So to be registered in the city, you would need to have a visa or a living permit, a residency, and to have a residency, you'd have to have the working permit. There's all these interconnections. And working through them was a struggle.
And was it the same for Charlotte with her Italian passport?
Yeah, and just different. Like how I describe it, that it's kind of everyone comes to the moving situation with different luggage, if you like, so different benefits that they can leverage and obviously things that they don't have to be able to leverage. So for Shah, being able to live and work here wasn't a consideration for her. So the permit and the residency side of things was with me. But my residency hinged on Charlotte's residency here, which hinged on her having a job here and rental contract here.
So did Charlotte have to have a job first for you to get a few things to allow you to get a job?
Yeah, Charlotte had to have a job so that she could find somewhere to live, which would allow her to register with the city, which would allow them. So there's all these things, right? And you just don't know where to start with them.
And did you not know any of this before you went?
No.
Love it. Just for those who are listening, Matt's shaking his head vigorously. It's incredible. Yeah. It's what a maze to work through.
We learnt pretty quickly that the job was the first domino that needed to fall, and that's where we started to focus our energy. Our thinking was that once we had the job arranged, on which was on the, in quotation marks, on the proviso that we both had working permits, which at that point I didn't, that then we would be able to, the other things would fall into place more easily. I think we moved house and accommodation like throughout it all 6 or 7 times. And they're the days that we would most need to be on each other's page. Because it's unwinding. We'd be putting all of the suitcases in the Uber to get to the new place and then feel a sense of home, but know that home we'd only booked for 4 to 6 weeks because we're still getting the contract, which would allow us to have the job, which would allow us to have the rental. So, the big days.
Yeah, wow. So, Matt, it must have been quite stressful, if I may say so, for you and Charlotte, and a lot of uncertainty with when your dad was ill in Australia. Now, I know that, as you said, you went back to Melbourne. Kind of, your trip it could have almost been cut short. Even the journey that you're on. How did you and Charlotte? What kind of impact did that have on the goals that you had, and how did you work through that? How did you work through that?
Well, in the lead up to moving in the first place, it was a point of discussion and something that I'd spoken to people, including my dad, about. And I suppose the conceptual approach we were taking was, you've got to get on, like you've got to go, like you can't put everything on hold so the decision we made as a family and obviously as a couple was that, we made the decision to go, even if there were some things in Melbourne that might have needed our attention as time went on. And that, to a certain extent, did nag at us. And to a certain extent, it played out much sooner than we had expected. Dealing with Dad's escalating health issues from afar was really challenging. And I lent on my sisters and, some of my good friends to take some really difficult calls. And there's only so much you can do from afar, even though I was involved. And making that decision or working through the reality of, is this the event that we need to go home quickly for, was a really tough one. 24 hours can feel like a lifetime, but in that time we had to make that call and book a flight, And
so did a family member call and basically say, Matt, you better come home now?
There was multiple steps to it. Yeah. So when it became apparent that Dad's health was turning quickly and was hospitalised, I was involved in the discussions with the oncologists and so forth. And, we would have these conference calls where I would be, there'd be people sitting around in the hospital room having this discussion with a doctor, and you'd be trying to kind of unpack what they were saying. And, in the end, I sent my best friend in to kind of ask the really difficult questions that made it easier for us to make decisions, because there was grey areas in what they were saying.
Got it.
I wasn't a part of those discussions. They kind of got that call that was like, all right, then it was real to have to go home.
Yeah.
And when we were making the arrangements to leave Amsterdam, we took the symbolic step of leaving a suitcase with quite a few things here and only taking back some things that would get us through. At that point we were thinking a month or 2 months or 3 months in Melbourne. And it would never really crossed our mind, the idea of returning to Melbourne for good. It was always this kind of brief interruption to our experience here. And this as well was in the context of really starting to face some of those challenges that, we've been discussing. It was a very dry situation from a work applications perspective. We were jumping between subleases. At that point, we were 1 or 2 days away from not having any accommodation organised, and we were in our 4th sublease. So life outside of the immediate situation was challenging, but we still had the commitment to stay, because it was what we were on, and we knew we were going to face some challenges, and returning to Melbourne was just going to be another one of them.
Now, actually, Matt was a little bit worried that this podcast was coming across quite negative, and we actually discussed the balance of the topics that we were exploring, and we felt that this was a really good reflection of the reality and what it really takes to move countries. The good news is, however, that there was also a lot of really amazing, you could say positive stories in Matt and Charlotte's journey over the past year. Let's turn to some of those right now. If that's okay, I'd love to, how have you and Charlotte as a team approached this and complemented each other?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an amazing experience to do together. And I think all throughout this whole thing, it's been, the real highlight has just been that it's something that we've been doing together. And yeah, it's been awesome. And I can't imagine what the experience would have been like without her. I'm a little reluctant to say that, because I realise some people aren't in a relationship and doing this in a relationship. So I'm sure that it would just be a different experience to the one I've had, but it wouldn't be the same one. And, it's really put the idea of a partnership under the spotlight, because, and I'm really grateful that all throughout it, we've been super supportive of one another, and really we used to joke it was kind of us against the world. It felt like at some points. And again, it's potentially being dramatic, but it did feel like that. And it was really nice. And, sometimes I'd be having a good week and she would need a bit of a pickup, and vice versa throughout different times.
Yeah.
We've had to be creative together. She's, in some ways, I question what I've brought to the table, the way that she has been. So she was really diligent she was the captain of our. So I spoke about the idea of teamwork. It's we used to joke that we were running an organisation, and Charlotte was the CEO, so she
Mm.
was the boss, and
Mm.
would oversee everything. And then we would have our different departments along the way. So,
Mm.
for example, Charlotte was head of housing, so
Okay.
she was
Yeah.
the one leading our rental search. I was head of finances, so I was
Okay.
making sure we were, extracting all the value we could out of the
Yeah.
limited funds that we were working with for these
Yeah.
things.
It just strikes me, I think, throughout this whole conversation, I just want to emphasize, like, it's been a very disciplined and diligent effort from you and Charlotte, is what I'm hearing. 'Cause it's easy to put all this to the past and figuring stuff out, but actually it was the daily discipline, is what I'm hearing, that got you to where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Have I heard that kind of correctly, Matt? Yeah.
And it was we've got a whiteboard that lies around the house that, about once a week we would check in on what were the jobs to be done. And there's moments where I go like, has this been worth it? And then there's moments where I go, this is why we've done it. And I feel as though
what would be a moment where you're like, yeah, like, fuck yeah, this is spot on. This is why we're here.
Yeah. And there've been more of them in the last few weeks than
Yeah,
before.
okay.
So there's a couple. And I've thought of these. I've been on the lookout for them. Vondel Park is the park that's in the middle of Amsterdam. It's probably a 3 or 4 kilometre circuit. It's got lakes and parks and lots of, greenery, and it's a really beautiful park. Like, Vondel Park to me is one of the highlights of living in Amsterdam. And the other night, riding home we had a work event that finished quite late. It was 10 p.m, which in Amsterdam, in the middle of summer, which it is now, that's, the sun's still up. It doesn't go down to 11:30. I'm riding down just like through Vondel Park. It's really, 15, 16 degrees. There's the sun's just setting. There's a few people riding around me. There's a couple of people running. There's people just like sitting, drinking or picnicking or whatever they're up to. And I was sort of riding, cruising home after this thing, going like, this is it. Like, when it comes to that European lifestyle that you envision.
What a great scene. Yeah. What a great scene. Yeah.
And that's when I was thinking to myself, without making it sound too grandiose, it's just like, this is kind of those moments you really should cherish, and that you that you can really enjoy. And at Vondel Park, all throughout it, going for runs around there when I wasn't working, and watching all the bikes on their way to work, and people, all kinds of people, everyone uses it as a thoroughfare, what they're up to. And like, it's a super, like, everyone seems to have their priorities in order in Amsterdam, and it's quite motivating to be a part of.
What one piece of advice would you give someone, whether it's something specific to do or just something more general, practical, emotional,
Aside from do it and jump in and like, learn on the go, if you're willing to tolerate uncertainty and perhaps compromise on, like, progress all throughout it, maybe in terms of financial or career or whatever else you might consider in that bucket. I would also say looking for work in advance isn't a bad idea.
Okay.
Because, so isn't that practical? But it's like, the reason is, I think that my learning is that work is really central to a sense of stability, whether it's something that's a longer term career ambition, or just something to pay the bills on an ongoing. When the stress of how am I going to make ends, that sounds very dramatic. When the stress of dipping into finances or not being able to spend as freely as you might like, it does impact your experience there. And that, it means that you've got to be creative and a bit resourceful and things like that. But having at least some work is nice, and understanding where that might come from, I think would be a wise thing to plan for.
Fantastic. Matt, thank you very much for joining me on this podcast. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to listen and learn from you, and to learn what you and Charlotte are doing. We wish you every success.
Thank you, Sasha. I've got another thing to share about just another comment. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, please.
If I can editing.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I think that one thing I thought of that was really nice that Charlotte said to me, and she's probably going to be embarrassed if I share it, was that, once we were talking to some friends and she made the comment, home is wherever Matt and I are together.
Mm.
And I thought that was just really nice, that we had been unearthed. We were facing a bit of uncertainty all throughout it, but it was this sense of, like, wherever we were together, even if it was a bit not exactly our home base for the long term, it was kind of our home together, and something, the project we were working on, and we had the comfort and support of one another. So I think that was really nice. I'll never forget that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wayfinders. If you found it interesting, please share, comment, help me build my audience. And if you have ideas for guests, perhaps even yourself, do get in touch. Thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.